That we begin this morning in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where closing arguments are set to take place later this morning in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial after 8 days of dramatic testimony.
So Rittenhouse faces 6 charges, including intentional homicide after shooting 3 men during a protest last year, killing 2 of them. Well, now Kenosha is bracing for a verdict, which could arrive sometime this week. Joining us from this morning from Kenosha is NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber, and also NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas is here on set with us. So good morning to both of you. And Ellison, we're going to start with you here. We know the big news last week. The prosecution requested that the jury also hear some lesser charges and consider those. Is that still a possibility? And what else can we expect today?
Yeah, so the judge said on Friday that he is inclined to allow the jury to consider some lesser charges as the prosecution has requested, but not necessarily all of the ones. We were expecting to get some information on what lesser charges may be allowed this weekend. The judge might have communicated that already to the prosecutors and the defense, but publicly we have not yet gotten that information. But again, he has said that he is inclined to allow lesser charges to be considered by the jury here. Remember, Kyle Rittenhouse is facing 6 different counts, 5 of them felonies, 3 related to homicides, and 1 of them a misdemeanor. Let me read you his charges just to give you a quick reminder. He's facing 1 count first-degree intentional homicide, 1 count attempted first-degree intentional homicide, 1 count first-degree reckless homicide, 2 counts first-degree recklessly endangering safety, 1 count possession of a dangerous weapon by a person under the age of 18. That last one is a misdemeanor. Again, the other 5 are felonies. Apologies for the noise. We have a trash truck going by early this morning. But so on Friday, when the judge was talking about being inclined to allow those lesser charges, he said that one potential way that that could possibly go would say in the case of the second person that Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed that night, Anthony Huber, that the jury would possibly be able to consider reckless homicide instead of intentional homicide. When it comes to Joseph Rosenbaum, the first person Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed that night, the judge said he is not inclined to allow lesser charges in that instance because the defense objected. And he said he thinks that because of that, that would be overturned upon appeal. Lindsay.
And now, Danny, let's bring you in here. You're here on set with us. So what are you going to be watching for today in closing arguments? That's what we're waiting on.
Ladies and gentlemen of the morning show, I'm doing my closing argument bit. The magic word of today that we're going to hear a lot is the word provocation. This was a huge win for the prosecution to get this as a jury instruction, because if the jury buys it, it can negate self-defense in its entirety. Although Rittenhouse has the chance to reacquire self-defense, but he has to show that he withdrew from the fight and communicated that withdrawal. But otherwise, the prosecution has to disprove each and every element of self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. This is their trump card. This is their Uno, draw 4, choose the next card card. And so look for the defense to respond with this. This provocation argument was so important to the prosecution that in their opening, they mentioned it 0.0 times. They only developed this idea throughout the trial when this new evidence was sprung, this pixelated video that they're saying shows that Kyle is the first aggressor. Now, a lot of folks are saying, look, Kyle Rittenhouse, it was a provocation for him to walk around open carrying a firearm. But that may be morally true. That's not legally true. And even the prosecution is not pursuing that angle. They are arguing that at some point he lifted his firearm. That provoked the Joseph Rosenbaum attack. And everything that came after that was a domino effect.
Real quick, the fact that the prosecution wants the jury to consider lesser charges, does that give us an idea of their thinking and thinking they may not get some of the more serious ones?
Not always. Prosecutors do this, and it is a way of hedging your bets. But in a case like this, I would suspect that if the prosecution believed they had an airtight case, that they would not be asking for lesser charges. So it may be a signal of anxiety by the prosecution.
Let's go back out to Ellison in Kenosha. So, Ellison, this incident really centers around really the unrest that happened following the shooting of Jacob Blake last summer. How is Kenosha preparing for this verdict?
So the governor has activated some 500 members of the National Guard to be on standby to come to Kenosha should local authorities ask for their assistance. Speaking with people here, there is kind of a quiet tension, if you will. Most people that we have spoken to, they say that they are worried that there could be some sort of violence regardless of the outcome. They're hoping that it doesn't happen. The governor has asked people who do not live in this area, in the city or the county, to stay out of this community this coming week. Lindsay, Savannah.
And now our own Gabe Gutierrez actually spoke with Rittenhouse's mother, Wendy, yesterday. First, let's listen and we'll talk on the other side. Danny.
Do you think he would have needed to defend himself if he hadn't gone down there in the first place?
You know, if he went down there to help and he was chased by a mob, he was chased by Rosenbaum, and witnesses stated that Rosenbaum lunged at Kyle and told him that he was going to kill him that night. You know, and what happened, you know, is, yeah, 2 guys lost their lives that night.
So, Danny, as you just walked us through a moment ago, I mean, this hinges on self-defense for the defense here. What do you make of comments like that, and what does that mean about that provocation argument from the prosecution that you just mentioned?
That is the right moral question. Should Kyle Rittenhouse have been wandering around in a riot with an AR-15 style weapon? Absolutely, that's something we should all debate. However, legally, it is not provocation to do what he did. Now, the prosecution or other folks might say, well, it was unlawful in that he allegedly was not supposed to be carrying a firearm. He was underage. But in Wisconsin, the provocation must be an unlawful act, and it must actually provoke the attack. So the mere fact that he may not have been allowed to carry a firearm, there's no evidence that Joseph Rosenbaum or any of the other people recognized that, and that was what provoked any attack by them.
All right, Ellison Barber, Danny Savalas, thank you both so much. We will be hearing from you plenty today. NBC News Now will air those closing arguments live later this morning.
Now to Washington, where President Biden will sign into law the new $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. The bill had bipartisan support in Congress, and both Democrats and Republicans are expected to be at the signing ceremony on the White House lawn later this afternoon. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now with more on this. Mike, good morning. So this is a big day for the president, obviously one he's been waiting on for a while, finally managing to get this bill over the finish line. What can we expect from today's ceremony, and who do we think will be there?
Well, as then Vice President Biden once said at one of President Obama's bill signings, this is a big deal for President Biden. And that's why the White House says he really wants to use this bill signing as an opportunity to talk to the American people about 2 big campaign pledges that he feels like he's delivering on. The first is the bill itself, billions of dollars for roads, bridges, electric vehicle charging stations, replacing lead water pipes, expanded broadband access. The other pledge, though, remember how often he talked in the campaign about trying to bring Washington together, working with Republicans. That's a big part of this legislation as well. And that's why the guest list is so interesting today. The White House says they've invited every Republican who voted for this bill in the House and the Senate, but we know only a few of them so far plan to show up. Mitch McConnell, for instance, the Senate Minority Leader, he has said he's not going to be there, even though he called this a godsend for the people of Kentucky. Former President Donald Trump, he's called this a political gift for the president, and he's been criticizing Republicans like McConnell who voted for it.
And now, Mike, this comes at a difficult time for the president. Let's talk about some new numbers we have. So a poll over the weekend by the Washington Post and ABC News found that his approval rating has dropped to 41%. Now, of course, there's these concerns over inflation, the COVID-19 pandemic, and then this infrastructure bill taking quite a long time, that social safety net bill we're still waiting on. How big of a boost could this bill be for the president? I mean, do you think this is going to have an impact on voters, on the people who approve or disapprove in this poll? And then pending social and safety net package, could that help improve Democrats' chances going into the midterms next year?
Well, it was interesting to look, if you look at and dive into the numbers of this poll, there are some contradictions there. It says that voters overwhelmingly approve of the president's both infrastructure bill and that larger social safety spending bill, but they also are worried about the government spending. And the biggest worry for this White House is that roughly half of the voters in this survey said they blame President Biden for inflation concerns. And that's why you're going to see the president really hitting the road more. After he signs the bill today, he's going to New Hampshire tomorrow, talk about one of those bridge projects that's in the works, going to Michigan, another key battleground state, talking about the auto industry program. He's going to be trying to make the argument that these investments will actually help deal with the inflationary concerns Americans are feeling.
Mike, quickly, before I let you go, President Biden's agenda today, he's supposed to have a virtual meeting with his Chinese counterpart. What's on the agenda for that?
Yeah, this is a significant meeting. Now, the very careful diplomatic language they use at the White House, as we heard from Jen Psaki in previewing this, is that this meeting today is all about managing the responsible competition between these two countries. President Biden met President Xi when they were both vice presidents a decade ago. This is a personal relationship that the president really wants to use now to try to both deal with some of those areas of tension, including trade and human rights, but also find areas where they can continue to work together, especially on climate. We saw that bear out with the big climate deal that was reached in Scotland over the weekend.
All right, Mike Memoli at the White House for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The infrastructure bill will send much-needed money to states across the country for repairs and investment. And one state that could feel a huge benefit is Kentucky. Officials there are hoping to make major improvements to the Brent Spence Bridge, which is a vital trade route that connects the state with Ohio. And NBC News correspondent Cal Perry joins us now live from Covington, Kentucky. Cal, good morning. So first off, start by talking to us about how important this bridge over the Ohio River is, why it needs an upgrade, and what that upgrade could mean for future trade.
Well, look, it's vital for American infrastructure. There's no question about that. The bridge behind me carries some 3% of American GDP every year over the bridge. And look, it's been a decades-long battle to get this bridge fixed. In 1985, we saw an expansion of the lanes on the bridge, and now it carries much more traffic than it was designed to carry. 150,000 cars a day, but it was only designed to carry 85,000 cars a day. It is very symbolic of the American infrastructure, the problems that need to be overcome, and why this bill is important. I had a chance to speak to the Kentucky governor yesterday about it. Here's a little bit more on what he said about the bridge.
This just isn't a project that Kentucky and Ohio benefit from. These are your manufacturers and your distributors in virtually every state east of the Mississippi. And while the bridge is old, it is structurally sound, but it was never designed for this much traffic. And so building a companion bridge, which is this project, which I want to be the governor to finally get done after 3 or 4 others have tried, after 3 former presidents had pledged to get it done. I believe that now is the time.
Now, that companion bridge could cost upwards of $2.5 billion, but the president's saying the state of Kentucky could see some $10 million out of this bill. And, of course, Ohio will also be kicking in for the bridge. So hopes are high that we could finally see some funding and some work done on what is a key part of American infrastructure, guys.
And Cal, we know that big signing is going to be today, and there's been a lot of politics around this. A lot of Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, saying he's not going to be at the signing ceremony. Other Republicans have been attacking people on their own aisle for voting for it. Did you talk to the governor about the symbolism here of this win?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's a little surprising that Mitch McConnell is not going to be there. He hailed the bill. Now he's obviously caught in a difficult political position. But as you're going to hear from Governor Beshear, it is exactly as you say, very symbolic of the bipartisan effort that Washington put forward. Take a listen.
I believe it will be the signature project, the visual of this bipartisan infrastructure bill. A bridge connecting a state run by a Democratic governor with a Republican governor, of having a Republican U.S. senator, the minority leader, having voted for it, and the fact that it is so sorely needed, but also so necessary for our economy.
It'll be interesting to see this signing ceremony as it plays out there. Governor Beshear, obviously, with the high hopes of bipartisanship in Washington, though, you know, we could probably not expect that to last past like 5 p.m., guys.
All right. That's a pretty good prediction, Cal, in front of a beautiful sunrise there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon is expected to turn himself in later today after being indicted by a federal grand jury for contempt of Congress. Bannon was charged with 2 counts after refusing to answer questions related to the January 6 riots. It's the first time anyone has been prosecuted for contempt of Congress after asserting executive privilege. The decision could have major implications for the House committee's investigation moving forward. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delanian is outside the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. with more for us. Hey, Ken, good morning. So first off, walk us through exactly what Steve Bannon was charged with and why.
Good morning, Savannah. Bannon was indicted by a grand jury in Washington on 2 counts, as you said, of contempt of Congress, one relating to his refusal to comply with a subpoena to testify, and another relating to his refusal to turn over documents to that House committee investigating the January 6th attacks. These are misdemeanor charges that carry a penalty of up to a year in jail and up to a $100,000 fine. And it's an unusual move by the Justice Department to bring this kind of case, but nonetheless, they've brought it, and Steve Bannon is facing these criminal charges.
And we mentioned that he'll be turning himself in. A law enforcement official says that he'll surrender later today and then appear in court this afternoon. What do we expect to come out of that court appearance?
That's right. Well, first, we expect him to turn himself into the FBI's Washington field office down the street. And then later today, he will be arraigned in the federal courthouse behind me. And in an arraignment, the charges against him will be read, and he'll have a chance to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. And there may be some scheduling matters. These are misdemeanors, so the issue of detention is not in play. And then who knows what else might happen, whether he makes a statement, whether there are other revelations, remains to be seen. We'll be watching closely, Savannah.
Now, can we mention that this is the first time anyone's been prosecuted for contempt of Congress after asserting executive privilege? So Trump has been claiming executive privilege to prevent the House committee from accessing key documents or even questioning witnesses. Does Bannon's indictment make that a weaker strategy? And tell us what this does mean for the investigation moving forward.
Right. As you mentioned, the Justice Department has been very reluctant to get in the middle of these disputes between Congress and the executive branch, and in fact has passed on many chances to levy these charges in both the Obama administration and the Trump administration. But clearly in this case, Attorney General Merrick Garland thought that the rule of law was in play here. In fact, he said as much in a statement that this was such a blatant disregard for the will of Congress that he felt that these charges were warranted. Now, this issue of executive privilege, though, this may be a factor in this case and other cases. The question of whether a former president can claim executive privilege is being litigated right now in that lawsuit that Donald Trump has against the National Archives. So it may be a good strategy or a bad strategy. It's Donald Trump's only strategy. And even if he can delay the committee getting some of these documents, in a sense, he wins. So we'll have to see what the courts decide about that and whether they move this thing forward, Savannah.
All right, Ken Delaney, thank you so much.
We've heard this before. Health officials in the U.S. are paying close attention to what's happening in Europe right now. Coronavirus cases are rising to new levels there, despite the widespread rollout of vaccines. Nearly 2 million new cases were reported in Europe last week. That is the most in a single week in that region since the pandemic started. The situation is so bad in Austria right now. They're going back into lockdown, but only for the unvaccinated. About 2 million Austrians who haven't gotten the shot are now being told to stay home and only go out for essential trips. NBC News correspondent Claudio Livanga joins me now from Rome. So, Claudio, let's start in Austria. What's the situation there? How does this new lockdown work?
Well, this is a full lockdown, essentially, Savannah. Now, you remember that what a full lockdown looks like. Well, basically, you're allowed to go out only for the basic needs. So you need to go to the supermarket, you need to go to the pharmacy, you need to go to work, or you need to go to get that jab, that vaccination jab. And that is being essentially all the people who haven't been vaccinated in Austria are being told to do that. Stay at home unless you really have to go out. And they're doing that to try to boost the vaccination campaign, which in Austria is stuck at a little over 60%, which is very low compared to neighboring countries such as Italy, which neighbors with Austria. Here we have a vaccination rate of about 80%, which means that most of the overall majority of the adult population is now fully vaccinated, so fully immunized. And we see that in the numbers. I mean, we do have a surge in cases here as well, but the hospitalization and the death toll is very, very low compared to other countries like Austria and other countries where the vaccination rate is not so high. But Austria is not the only country that is thinking about or has already introduced new lockdowns. The Netherlands, for instance, is having similar problems. They have introduced a partial lockdown, meaning that the public places like restaurants and bars and places like that, they will close early at 8 o'clock in the evening, and spectators will not be allowed, at least for the time being, to go and see sporting events, once again to try to stop that fourth wave, which is affecting the whole of Europe.
Well, Claudio, let's go east of the Netherlands and Austria, because an official at the World Health Organization is calling this specific situation in Eastern Europe truly disastrous. So 3 countries right now are reporting record daily deaths. Why is this happening, especially months after the vaccine's been available?
Well, if you think about the vaccination rate that I was mentioning earlier, 80% here in Italy and a little over 60% in places like Austria, Just look east in Eastern Europe, in places like Romania and Bulgaria, the vaccination rate there is between 25 to 35%. And that is really, really low. And what's happening there? What you expect. There is a surge in the number of cases and the number of infections with record-breaking numbers since the start of the pandemic 2 years ago. And there is a surge also in the number of people who are dying there. The health system is completely overwhelmed. Essentially, what they're experiencing in Eastern Europe, it sounds like, and it looks like a first wave, not a fourth wave, because of the very low vaccination rate. Because if you combine that with the complacency among the population with the wearing of the masks or keeping social distance because people during the summer think it's all over, well, that's the result that you have.
All right, Claudio Lubanga, thank you so much.
Let's stay on this and bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Uche Blackstock. Dr. Blackstock, always great to have you with us. So let's pick it up right there. We just heard Austria going back into lockdown for those who are not vaccinated. Could this serve as a warning to Americans here in the U.S. who have been reluctant to get the vaccine up until now? I mean, we know Europe has kind of been this early indicator for us throughout the pandemic. What do you think this could mean here?
Good morning, Savannah. And I think as your correspondent mentioned, we're seeing this in Europe, especially in countries with low vaccination rates, and combined with Delta, is we're seeing these surges. And I think we need to think about places in the U.S. with low vaccination rates. We've only fully vaccinated about 58% of our population. We're heading into the winter, cold weather, people will be mingling indoors. There's waning immunity from people who were vaccinated earlier in the year. Only 7 states with mask mandates. And so I do think that we should be incredibly concerned about what's to come and use what's happening in Europe as a harbinger of what to expect here.
Dr. Claudio addressed this, but there's vaccine hesitancy everywhere in the U.S., in Europe. I mean, the latest data, for example, show that only 23% of adults in Bulgaria have been fully vaccinated. In Romania, that number is just 34%. So is this a situation in which boosters wouldn't really help because so few are vaccinated to begin with?
Yeah, definitely that is such an excellent point. We know that for the vaccinated, there's this issue of waning immunity, mostly just against infection. The vaccines are still effective against the most severe outcomes. But really, it's the fact that there are such large percentages of the populations in these countries, and even, in local areas here in the U.S., regional areas, that remain unvaccinated. And until we get those vaccination numbers up, we'll continue to see surges, which I think is why it's important that we have to think about these other layers of mitigation, mask wearing, rapid testing, ventilation, filtration. We can't forget about those other layers of strategies that can help keep the case numbers down.
Absolutely. And doctor, what does this mean for Americans who are vaccinated? What should people be doing right now if we are looking at the potential of a winter surge?
Right. I mean, I think even fully vaccinated people need to be careful. Think about what's going on in your community. I would definitely still be wearing masks indoors in crowded places, and also be thinking about the other vulnerable people around you, the elderly, immunocompromised people whose immune systems are not as strong, even if they are vaccinated. We have to make sure we're keeping everybody safe.
All right. Dr. Blackstock, always great to have you. Thanks so much for your expertise this morning.
Tracking some wild weather from the weekend. Rain, hail, and a tornado hit parts of the Northeast.
Yeah, I was not here for that, but I saw a lot of videos of the hail. NBC's meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now with a look at the aftermath of that storm. Hey, Bill, are we in the clear?
Yeah, it was a wild Saturday, though. Usually we don't talk about things 2 days, after they happen, but it was just such a rare event. I mean, we're talking about areas in states like Rhode Island and Connecticut that have never had a report of a November tornado before until Saturday. So let me show you some of the pictures and some of the damage from those. These weren't big, huge tornadoes. These weren't the ones that, you can get in like Oklahoma, but they were what we call, EF0s or EF1s, winds in the range of maybe 80 to about 110 miles per hour. That's still plenty strong enough to take down a lot of trees. We had some minor structural damage on a few homes. The biggest issue was the trees falling on power lines, knocking power out, and obviously pictures like that with trees falling on cars. So in all, 8 total tornadoes reported in New England in the middle of November. Pretty wild. All right, so let's get to what we're dealing with. In the wake of that, the cold air has moved in. We've had some lake effect snow. This is the kind of stuff we expect to be talking about in November. So the cold is on its way down over the warm lake. So we have a little bit of additional lake effect left. Not a lot, just the hill town south of Buffalo and some areas of the Adirondacks. But it's a cold morning. For areas of the south, this is by far the coldest morning you've had this winter. 30s in Jackson and also Montgomery. Atlanta's at 42. Even Savannah, Georgia's at 41. And when you add the wind in, it feels even colder than that. So the forecast for today, not everybody's cold and chilly. Look at Denver, 75 and sunny. Oklahoma City and Dallas, gorgeous. New Orleans, very nice. So there are some areas of the country that still feel like fall, but still feeling like winter the next 2 days, especially in New England. And my word of advice to you guys, I hope you're listening. Thursday in the Northeast and New England is going to be about 65 to 70 degrees. We do not have many of those days left. So if you're thinking about maybe if I need to burn a day off, Thursday is your day.
You got 4 days to create an excuse. All right, Bill Cairns, thanks so much.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.